Hey everyone. Today we need to talk about a single question that got asked out loud in a congressional hearing room and the silence that answered it. Picture this. A congresswoman from San Diego stands up at a House Armed Services Committee hearing. Her district holds one of the largest military communities in the entire country. Thousands of Navy and Marine families, many with someone deployed right now, in the middle of an active conflict with Iran. And for weeks, she says, her office phones have not stopped ringing. Military families, scared, asking her the same thing over and over. Is the man sending our kids into harm's way actually okay? So, on April 29th, 2026, Representative Sara Jacobs looks across the room at the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and she says something you almost never hear a member of Congress say about a sitting president. It pains me to even have to ask this. Then she asks it anyway. Do you believe the president is mentally stable enough to be the commander in chief? Yes or no? And here is the thing that turned a routine budget hearing into a national moment. He didn't say yes, but that exchange is just the surface. Because buried in the congressional record, printed in black and white, there is a document that goes so much further than anything Jacobs said that day, and almost nobody is talking about it. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly what's in it. If you've got family in uniform, or you just pay attention to who has their finger on the button, this affects you. So stay with me, because what Hegseth did next is the whole story. So here's what happened next, right there in that hearing room. Hegseth did not answer the question. Instead, he flipped it around. He asked Jacobs whether she'd ever raised the same concern about Joe Biden. It was a deflection, and a practiced one. Jacobs didn't take the bait. She pointed out the obvious. Biden isn't the president. Donald Trump is, and he's been back in office for more than a year and a half. The question on the table was about the man in charge right now. Hegseth still wouldn't give a straight answer. He said he wouldn't engage in what he called disrespect of the commander-in-chief. He praised Trump as an incredible leader focused on the troops, strong words. But notice what's missing from all of it. A simple yes. Think about what that means. The Secretary of Defense, the man who runs the entire United States military, was asked a direct yes or no question about whether his boss is mentally stable enough to command that military. And the answer he chose was to talk about Joe Biden. Jacobs laid out exactly why she was asking. She wasn't pulling this out of thin air. She pointed to the president's own public behavior, the social media posts that had gotten stranger and darker. One in particular, where Trump posted an image of himself dressed as Jesus, in robes, holding a glowing ball of light. He later deleted it after backlash, including from conservatives and religious figures. She pointed to a post warning that the entire human civilization could be at risk. This is the commander-in-chief, in the middle of a shooting war, posting things that his own allies found alarming. After the hearing, Jacobs clipped the exchange and put it on X. Her caption was 8 words long. He didn't say yes, and that speaks volumes. And here's what should stop you cold. This wasn't one congresswoman having a bad day or scoring a political point. Because at almost the exact same time this hearing was happening, something much bigger was already moving through Congress, on paper, with signatures attached, and it wasn't coming from where you'd expect. Because 3 weeks before Jacobs ever opened her mouth in that room, another member of Congress had already put the question in writing. On April 10th, Representative Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, sent a formal letter to the Whitehouse physician Captain Sean Barbabella. Not a tweet, not a soundbite. An official request demanding a comprehensive cognitive and neurological evaluation of the president, with the results made public. His reasoning was specific. He wrote that at a time when the country is at war, a war he noted was started without a vote in Congress, the American people have to be able to trust that the commander-in-chief has the mental capacity to do the job. That's not vague. That's a sitting member of Congress saying out loud that he isn't sure the president can. The White House response? They called Raskin a lightweight and a stupid person's idea of a smart person and accused Democrats of covering for Biden. Notice the pattern, same as the hearing. Insult the questioner. Bring up Biden, never actually answer. 4 days later, Raskin went further. He introduced legislation to create a bipartisan independent commission, the kind of body the 25th Amendment actually contemplates, to evaluate whether a president is able to serve. Read that again. There is now a bill in Congress built around the question of removing this president for fitness. And it wasn't just Raskin. Around the same time, Representative Mark Takano sat across from Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and asked him directly whether he shared the concerns of millions of Americans about the president's mental fitness and emotional stability. He pressed Kennedy to insist on an assessment. Kennedy's answer? He said there has never been a president more sane. There hasn't been a president more sane. Hold on to that sentence, because we're going to come back to it. So now look at what's stacking up. A congresswoman from a military district, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, a formal letter, a piece of legislation. repeated, direct, on-the-record questions. And every single time, the administration's move is the same. Deflect, insult, change the subject. But none of that explains why the questions started in the first place. To understand that, you have to look at what the president himself was actually doing and saying. And that is where this stops being about politics at all. Because here's the part that isn't a quote from a politician. It's the record itself. Start with the war. The United States was in an active military conflict with Iran, and according to Raskin, the president had launched it without a declaration or authorization from Congress. Set aside whether you think that war was right or wrong. The point is the scale of the decision. One person sending Americans into combat. Now layer on the behavior. The Jesus image we mentioned, robes and a glowing orb, deleted after even his own side recoiled. Posts sent out past midnight attacking Pope Leo XIV. That warning about the end of human civilization, a pattern of public communication that one congressman, Jim McGovern, described in a committee hearing by saying the president is very obviously deeply unwell and that the people back home think he is, in his word, nuts. Then there's the thing the White House did with the doctor. Back in April 2025, after Trump's physical, the White House physician put out results fast and declared him fully fit to serve as commander-in-chief. Clean bill of health quickly. But in May 2026, when it was time for the next physical, the White House at first said nothing at all. The transparency that existed a year earlier just vanished. When you've got nothing to hide, you release the results in 48 hours. When you go quiet, people notice. And here's the number that should make every Republican watching this pause. This is not a poll of Democrats. In February 2026, a Reuters and Ipsos survey found that a majority of Americans say the president has become erratic with age. That part you might expect. But buried in that same poll was a figure nobody on cable news wanted to dwell on. Among Republicans, his own voters, almost a third of them said the same thing. I'm going to come back to that number because of who else it lines up with. Critics even started calling him Sleepy Don. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's the exact insult he spent years throwing at Joe Biden. The label he built a campaign on came boomeranging right back. So we've got the war, the posts, the silence around the physical, and a third of his own party openly uneasy. The question stopped being whether anyone was worried. The question became why the people closest to him kept refusing to say a single reassuring word. And the answer to that brings us to the part they really did not want getting out. So let's talk about that number and who it lines up with. Almost a third of Republicans saying their own president has become erratic. That's the cross-party validator, not a CNN panel, not a Democratic talking point. Roughly 30% of the people who voted for him. And it isn't just anonymous poll respondents. Go back to the last campaign. Nikki Haley, a Republican, his own rival for the nomination, openly questioned whether Trump was mentally capable of serving after he repeatedly confused her with Nancy Pelosi and claimed she'd been in charge of Capitol security on January 6th. A Republican presidential candidate said it on the record years ago. The concern isn't new, and it didn't start with the Democrats. Now connect the dots across everything we've seen. A congresswoman from a military town asks a direct question and gets Biden in response. The ranking member of the Judiciary Committee asks in writing and gets called a lightweight. A congressman asks the health secretary and gets told there's never been a more sane president. The White House releases a glowing physical in 48 hours one year, then goes silent the next. And a third of the president's own party quietly agrees something is wrong. Every one of those is a different person, in a different room, on a different date. But they're all circling the same thing, and every single time, the people with the power to simply answer the question chose not to. Remember what Kennedy said, there has never been a president more sane. Now put that next to the deleted Jesus post and the midnight attacks on the Pope, and ask yourself if that sentence sounds like an answer or a script. Here's the uncomfortable part. They've had every chance to put this to rest. One cognitive test, one straight yes, one transparent physical. That's all it would take. The fact that nobody will provide any of it, while the questions keep multiplying from inside their own ranks, tells you something. They're not refusing because the question is offensive. They're refusing because they don't like where the honest answer leads. And that brings us to the document I mentioned at the very beginning. The one sitting in the Congressional Record that goes further than any politician on this list was willing to go. Because the most serious warning in this entire story didn't come from Congress at all. And here it is. On April 30th, 2026, one day after that hearing, Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Jack Reed entered a statement into the official Congressional Record. It came from a group of 36 medical experts, neurologists, forensic psychiatrists, geriatricians, doctors, not politicians. And they identified themselves as both Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals. Their conclusion, printed in the permanent record of the United States Senate, was that the president shows what they called a marked deterioration in cognitive functioning and grandiose and delusional beliefs, and that he should be removed from office for medical reasons. Their stated reason for going public was the one thing this whole story keeps circling. He alone commands roughly 5,000 nuclear weapons, and no one has the authority to countermand a launch order. Now, in fairness, those doctors said plainly that they had not personally examined him and were not issuing a formal diagnosis. They based it on his public behavior, and the White House physician's last official finding called him fully fit. You should weigh both. But here's what you can't unsee. 36 doctors from both parties felt strongly enough to put their names in the Congressional Record next to the word removal. Connect it all. The hearing, the letter, the bill, the poll, the silence, and now this. That's not one angry congresswoman. That's a pattern. And the pattern is that the people who could end the question with one honest sentence keep choosing not to. You now know more about this story than almost anyone scrolling past the headline tonight. If breakdowns like this are what you're here for, hit subscribe and turn on the bell because there's more coming, and drop a comment. What was the moment in this video where it clicked for you? Because it all comes back to one congresswoman, one yes or no question, and a Secretary of Defense who looked at it and decided not to say yes. And that still speaks volumes.